thanks for having me here. I don't know, Mike, do you want to give an intro about how this all started?
Yeah, well, I met Eric at UTASA National Conference, or East Coast Conference last year. And I went to his workshop, and it was really, really interesting. And I thought he had some good things to share about Taiwan with us. Sonny, you also.
I went to his workshop this year.
Oh, yeah, you did. And then also met Roy before because I don't know what the legal issues are, but I guess we're kind of underneath stuff.
We're partners.
Partners program, whatever it may be. So as we said before, this has been going on for about a year now, so this is kind of a joke. I actually literally opened this up and I was like, March 3rd, oh yeah, that, wait, it's missing a zero and it's missing a 2019. So a year later, finally we're here. First, kind of about us. Outreach for Taiwan is, so I graduated from Rutgers about some years ago, and when I was TASA, I was just like you guys. And when I was here, I had a lot of talks with one of my friends. We talked about Taiwan, like, oh yeah, I'm Taiwanese, I'm so proud, whatever it is. And then about sometime later, we're like, wait, what the fuck does that actually mean? Like we'll shout these things, but anyone actually contests us, we just don't know too much about it. And we want to learn more, and we're like, oh, our board, we should be doing more of these events, but we realized that we actually don't know anything. And it's also really hard because a lot of them are, like, the information are Mandarin as well too. And then we'll go to older generations. Does anyone know an organization called FAPA? It's Roy knows. Anyone? Like Formosan Association for Public Affairs. There's two branches of them, but one of them is actually kind of like a lobbying group that actually helps lobby for Taiwan with the U.S. Congress. But then like a lot of them are a little bit older generation. They're very biased in terms of things that they're trying to push for. And we realized that obviously as younger Taiwanese Americans, there is a disconnect in that because like you'd be like, oh, like the reasons why they're so emotionally attached to Taiwan is kind of different than how you guys, Taiwanese Americans, might be as well too. And this is not just for Taiwanese Americans, but obviously for anyone who's just interested, right? Like I think a lot of times TASAs will always have FAQ question. The first one's always do I have to be Taiwanese to join? Answer is always no, you don't have to be. This is a Taiwan interest group. I think a lot of times people remember the first part, but they don't really remember the second part beyond the Taiwanese interest group. So I think whatever it may be, I think it's interest there. So we've been doing we have workshops like these, speak at a couple of ITASA events. We also have our website with a lot of information too. Started 6 years ago and to this day. First disclaimer is that this is not our profession. We're not professionals in this area. We're not historians, not journalists, none of that. This is essentially, we're trying to be lead by example in terms of like there's information out there you can learn about it. It's not easy, so that's what we're here for, but there also might not always be correct. You guys have heard the term, like, history is written by the victors. So there's different sides to different stories, but we try to distill it as, I don't even like to use the word bipartisan because some things don't have two faces, there's multiple sides to it. So whatever information comes about, if there's any questions at any point, raise your hand, go like, I disagree with you, or I think I've heard otherwise, and we can definitely talk about it more. Also want to make this as casual as possible. One of the reasons why I hate doing these in classrooms is that it feels like a lecture, but so we could do it outside. So first disclaimer. So today's topic is going to be US-Taiwan-China relations. First off, something to keep in mind I want you guys to think about. Actually, no, I'm going to ask this. Why do you think this matters? Like, as yourself, as Taiwanese American, Asian American, why do you think this US-Taiwan-China relation matters? Any answers? Any thoughts? I'm going to open up with Roy. What do you think? Or do you guys already all know Roy's answer?
I'm not biased.
Start with that.
Taiwan's ultimate goal is to become a country, normalize relations to other countries, and that's what I'm working towards right now. So that matters to me on a very personal level.
So Taiwan for you is home.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Like as Taiwanese American, for example, born and raised in the States. Actually, wait. Raise of hands. Who's Taiwanese American here? Who would consider themselves straight Taiwanese? Asian. Is it a unique position or? Somewhere in between. So okay, so I guess like for those who are not Taiwanese, because there's going to be a lot more home, but Taiwanese Americans or Asian Americans, Chinese American, why do you guys think this matters to you guys? Oh, why does Taiwanese American, US-Taiwan-China relations matter to you guys as an individual level? Yep.
I think it's a matter of like being able to understand my own culture. You know, having like making sure that Taiwan's culture itself is not like like bulldozed over, erased.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
I was going to say, as a Chinese American, I think it's important to be sensitive to the history that the two countries share,
Mm-hmm.
and just sort of be in the know about that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think a lot of things that come about nowadays, especially with China such a limelight in politics and everything now, there's oftentimes if you hear someone like, oh, you're Taiwanese American, what's that thing going on with Taiwan and China? And it's like always helpful to have that in the back pocket. But hopefully we're gonna go through some slides, and then at the end of this, hope you guys have a little more thoughts about like why this would matter, maybe change some perspectives or just deeper understanding. Let's first start talking about China-Taiwan relations. This is actually kind of tricky because the word China, the word Taiwan are its geological location, it's a government. So we're going to start with the two lands at the very least. So we're going to start with the Treaty of Shimonoseki. So back in 1895, actually there's a lot of things that happened in Taiwan before 1895, but this is kind of more of the modern-ish history. 1895, at that time, Qing Dynasty was controlling over Taiwan, and at the end of the Sino-Japanese War, they signed the Treaty of Shimonoseki. And essentially, what happens is that the Qing Dynasty said, "We lost the war. Here you go. Here's Taiwan." Korea's there also involved somehow as well too. Never really paid attention to that part of the treaty. But with this, Taiwan got placed underneath the Japanese Empire, and so now we're going to talk about essentially the Republic of China and the Japanese Empire. So the Republic of China was formed in China in 1912. So when people usually equate Republic of China and Taiwan, they put as equivalents, but the time between 1912 to 1945 is actually starkly different. So during this time, in the 30s, World War II started. So Japanese started to invade into Chinese territories, and World War II started, and there was a lot of bombing. A lot of Taiwanese people actually were enlisted and fought in the Japanese on the Japanese side. So this is kind of the beginning of there's going to be local resentment sometimes between the local Taiwanese people and the Chinese people that later came over. But that starts there's a reason. You guys heard about the terms like Bunsen and Whitesun, the local Taiwanese and the foreign Taiwanese. They honestly, same ethnicity, same backgrounds, like grandparents, whatever, but there's a huge disconnect between them, and large part is because of the relations between the Republic of China and Japan as well too. Then World War II ended, and this is where the, I guess, controversy kind of really starts. World War II ended, and it takes time to make a treaty, but immediately after war, they proclaimed General Order No. 1, which essentially states that Taiwan, along with other areas that they lost during the war, now goes over to General Chiang Kai-shek, who is the president and leader of the Republic of China. So this is immediately after the war, and then they said sometime, hey, let's sit down, let's actually have a proper treaty. So they have the San Francisco Treaty. And in this treaty, and this is going to be referenced a lot, especially by people pushing for Taiwanese independence as well too, we'll actually come back to this a lot. Japan says that they renounce all rights and titles and claim to Formosa and the Pescadores, Formosa being Taiwan. So the biggest thing that people say is like, well, they never said they renounced the rights to who? They're just giving it up. So hence, Taiwan is free. However, something to realize about this particular event was that during this event, the Chinese Civil War was raging on. So they didn't know who to invite, either the Communist People's Republic of China or Chiang Kai-shek and the Republic of China as well too. So they decided, let's invite neither of them. And so this treaty was signed with no representation of China whatsoever at the location. And because of that, years later in 1950, they signed a Taipei Treaty, which essentially was US concerned about the rise of communism in Asia and said, okay, Japan, you guys have to sign it, officially sign Taiwan over to the Republic of China, the ROC. So this is another treaty that less talked about because Japan also said that, yeah, this treaty is void now, we're not doing this anymore. So this is kind of offhand. But I think the largest part to know about this time period is that there is a huge overlap, the difference between the Republic of China and Taiwan in itself. And then there's also kind of the Japanese culture that's instilled in Taiwan before 1945-49 as well too. This starts with the relationship between pre-ROC and PRC relations. Next section. Any questions so far? Anything confusing? Don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Okay, let's go on then. Any questions? So next is going to be PRC and ROC. Colloquially now we just call it like Taiwan and China relations. This is not talked about a lot, but I think this is quite important. Is really the Korean War in 1950. So during the Korean War, it was also with the Cold War as well too. It was the rise of communism within China. So North Korea and Mao from People's Republic of China said, we're petitioning to Russia saying, hey, we need you to help us spread our power. North Korea to South Korea, China to finish up the last bastion of the Republic of China within Taiwan. So they're both asking essentially Russia for money. And imagine this like TASA asking for the school, be like, hey, Hopkins, give me more money, give me more allocations. And they go like, well, we have limited funds, we have to do one of you guys first. Taiwan's an island nation, it's gonna be hard to take over. Let's do Korea first. It'll be quick. That's what they thought. And it was not. And so the Korean War happened. It would have been either the Korean War or the Taiwan War. So I think there could be an interesting discussion about alternative history. But the biggest thing is at this part, the United States also starts backing up both Taiwan and South Korea. With the Korean War raging on, US obviously got into that as well too. But even after that, there's a lot of actually CIA documents talking about how US government started putting a lot more support behind Taiwan as well too. Increase the number of arms sales and everything so that Taiwan they can make sure that communism doesn't break the Pacific Wall almost. This kind of forms like a anti-communism wall starting from South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, and like that's also why Vietnam War and everything is really important as well too. And that goes on to, we're going to revisit the China and Taiwan relations, but this is where US comes into play as well too. This is a clip that I want to show. So who here knows the show West Wing? The West Wing. 2, 3. So the West Wing, for those who don't know about it, first off, it's my favorite show. Straight up hands down favorite show. And it takes place in this fictional White House. Like, it's still the same White House, US government, but essentially you follow the senior staff and they kind of figure out like how government policies go about. A lot of the issues that they talk about are really relevant to actual things that are happening. Sometimes they use real countries, sometimes they make fake countries. The reason, so this airs in like the 90s, and so when I came to the States, this is already finished. Never heard about this until I came to the States. Came here, the reason why I started watching this is because season 3, episode 15 is literally an entire episode about Taiwan-China missile crisis. Then in season, I think this is 6, they revisit another Taiwan and talk about the flight. This scene, I think, is very, very iconic of kind of what happens when US, China start talking about dealing with relations and how Taiwan is such a big thorn in this entire topic. Back onto this senior staff, and essentially they're trying to set up a summit with between the US and China, and they're going through discussions, negotiations, figuring out from their own the Congress to figure out like what kind of information you want to talk about, and also do last-minute detailed protocols with China as well too.
Shrimp Financial Services.
Well, Josh, I think I speak for all of us when I say the summit seems to be in great shape.
Well, we're looking forward to it.
Thanks for your hard work.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Congressman.
What about Taiwan?
What about it?
They're going to want to discuss the sale of the 3PC Orion sub-hunting planes.
It's not on the agenda, Senator.
Oh, well, then I'm sure it won't be discussed.
We sell arms to Taiwan. We will continue to sell arms to Taiwan. It's not up for
At
discussion.
least not until we start pushing China on weapons exports to Pakistan.
China has pledged to stop exporting
Pledges that
weapons.
they've ignored, along with their WTO commitments and their agreements on prison labor.
Senator, I'm not sure I see the point.
The point, ma'am, is the Chinese tend to welch on their markers. And I don't want to see Josh here offer up the farm in exchange for more lies and empty promises.
I'll keep that in mind.
Good.
You know, the Democratic Party hasn't been overrun by a bunch of panda huggers.
Mr. Ziegler, we just have a few more items to discuss and decide. Let me see. 22, the guest list for the...
I thought cell phones weren't supposed to work in here.
They don't. 我就是一说美国的总统收到台湾的国旗，真的，他们敢做这种事情？好，我马上来。走吧。
How'd it go?
Fine, we're gonna want to go over the intellectual property stuff.
Hunt gave you a hard time.
Yeah, but this was Harrison Hunt's.
What did Hunt want?
Hunt wanted to give me a hard time. That brings new meaning to the word curmudgeon. Hey, I appreciate you letting me carry the ball on this one.
Well, yes, we'll have to keep my eye on.
Hey, we got a question from the gaggle about a flag that the president received during the national prayer breakfast this morning.
A flag?
A green flag from the Taiwanese delegation.
You're kidding, right?
Was that funny?
A green flag?
Green with a red flower.
No!
Josh.
The Chinese gonna freak out.
Isn't the Taiwanese flag red and blue?
Yes. No, there is no Taiwanese flag. There's the flag of the Republic of China commonly used in Taiwan, which is red and blue. The green one is the original flag of the Taiwan independence movement.
The guys who want to hold a tea party in Taipei Harbor and declare their independence from China.
Pretty much, so you can see how I might be mildly concerned about the symbolism of the president accepting their flag on the eve of a major summit with China. That's a little hysterical.
Just a touch.
So, we'll just give the flag back before anyone knows we have it. Hey, I thought you ran with the... They walked out. The Chinese protocol guys? They got a call from their embassy, something about the national prayer breakfast and a flag.
Margaret? Council needs you.
So strongly suggested if you guys are interested in a good TV show that has a little bit of Taiwan, it's definitely in there. I think for me, this is actually really strong because it just shows that like it's such an important topic that gets written 2 episodes of this entire major show, and there's actually something about Taiwan. So something interesting to think about. But this is a political comic about essentially whenever U.S. deals with China relations, Taiwan always becomes an issue, and they'll use it in whichever certain ways possible. And there is obviously it's a chip in negotiation, but it's also there are reasons for China caring about Taiwan's independence movement as well too. The big part really starts coming up with, in terms of international recognition, along with U.S. recognition, is starting with the United Nations Resolution 2758. So before the 1970s, Republic of China was, because of the World War II, Republic of China actually was one of the permanent seats on one of the P5s on the UN Security Council. That means they had full power to avoid any resolutions. However, in the 70s, they essentially said like, yeah, you guys are in a small island now, and China's getting bigger, the PRC is getting bigger, we can't ignore them. Like, you can't have 2 people representing China. One, you're saying that PRC represents China, one says ROC represents China. We can't have that. One of you guys only one of you guys can represent it. And so they had a huge vote, and the UN decidedly said, yeah, PRC, you guys are taking the permanent seat, you guys are representing China now, and ROC, you guys can get a general seat. To that, Chiang Kai-shek said, oh, hell no. And goes like, no, I ain't having any of that. Like, that's it's very shameful, I'm not having that. And he goes, I'm out of the United Nations. 30, 40, 50 years now, Taiwan's still trying to get back in, and it has been to no avail. But that really spurs on to the international recognition of it. And obviously leads to America's shift as well too. America's shift came a little bit later, kind of seeing the shift of relations between PRC and ROC. Shanghai Communique, joint communique in the 72, 79, with Nixon shaking hands with, he was Deng Xiaoping at that time, and they started normalizing relations. But at the same time, there was a huge push, in America, there's still a large push, fear of communism, at least in the 70s. So while we shift the diplomatic relations over to China, the U.S. wanted to say we still have to make sure that we have good relations with Taiwan as well too. So hence the Taiwan Relations Act was signed, and also the 6 assurances. It is the 40th anniversary of the Taiwan Relations Act, but essentially both of these essentially said we're not going to have any embassies over there, not formal diplomatic relations because we broke it off. However, TECO, for example, now takes all the diplomatic affairs and also ensures that U.S. will and will continue has always been and will always sell arms to Taiwan. Or to be completely fair, they actually said the Republic of China rather than Taiwan too. Depends on are there any law students here? No, okay. So yeah, I'm sure you talk to law students, it's like the words really matter. But essentially, for all intents and purposes, China says, we're shifting over, but don't worry, Taiwan, we got your back. Or ROC got your back. And during this time, China and Taiwan started growing through dark differences. From China's side, there was the Korean War, Cultural Revolution, the 3 communiques with the States, and then ending up with the Tiananmen Massacre in '89. So they're shifting, there's a strong sense of growing of communism, and then at the same time there's also a shift in terms of Cultural Revolution and how these people and their thoughts started changing. Tiananmen Massacre really came about when there was a push for democracy in China, but ultimately it was saying like, no, government, we're taking charge, this is how things are. There can be large philosophical debates whether maybe because of how the government is, China is the superpower that it is today. If it wasn't for that, it might have been different. But there's stark differences start growing. At the same time, Taiwan starts going towards democracy in itself. 228 massacre happened in 1947, which was essentially an explosion between the local Taiwanese and the nationalist Chinese who came over, and they started fighting each other. Ended up with the government essentially shooting, killing tens or hundreds of thousands of Taiwanese people. To this day, the number is still unknown. This leads to a martial law that gets placed in Taiwan, means no dissenting opinions against the government, no, there's a curfew. I went to American schools, and then my teacher would talk about how they used to have like dance parties, some of the teachers, and they'd have dance parties, and the cops would come up and be like, no music allowed, and like there would be certain music that wasn't allowed as well too. So while the turn for a very, very sharp turn into authoritarian government, after the resolution, and eventually the people started uprising, and the Wild Lily movement was actually kind of happened right after Tiananmen Massacre, but 2 of them sent in parallel. It was the people going saying, we want democracy, we want to pick our leaders. Instead of a tank rolling through the square and taking students down. At the time, then President Lee Teng-hui essentially says, you know what? It was the 3rd day of the protest, he says, come to my office, let's have a talk. And they essentially set an agenda saying, where are your demands, let's meet them, here's a timeline of how we're gonna move away from this nationally elected president to a national committee to like a people's vote. So at the end of '89 and '90, one took the shift for a powerful central government while the other gave power to the people. One thing to note, this is 1990. I myself was born in 1990, so when I was learning about the Wild Lily movement, yeah, my age, but it essentially showed how young Taiwan's democracy, and it wasn't until '96 that the first democratic election actually happened. And to kind of go into the different ways of the Taiwan-China relations, starting using the different presidents, for example. So the first democratically elected president was President Lee Teng-hui. This is closing in '96, and this is what was afterwards called like the third cross-strait crisis or something like that, or like the '96 missile crisis. What was happening was Lee Teng-hui was starting to be more and more pro-Taiwan. He was born in Taiwan, but he went through Japanese education, but he actually worked with the KMT, the Chinese Nationalist Party, which is more like pro-China-ish. But he's been having more of a Taiwanese identity forming within himself, and it's showing more and more. And essentially China at this time was a rising power. They said, don't elect this guy. You elect this guy, I'll show you what's gonna happen. So they have a missile essentially practice all along the sides of Taiwan. So these pictures, you see like the dots and like the squares around them, like those areas are essentially where they fire their missiles. This is in close proximity to Taiwan, and will essentially say it's a warning shot. Don't you dare do it. However, as we all know, the best way to unite people is to have a common enemy. So people, instead of being scared of doing it, they're like, oh, hell no, we're gonna go up against you. So what happens, even though Lee Teng-hui comes from the authoritarian government that people didn't like, they were like, no, we're voting him in. Over 50% of the votes went to him and he remained in office. So it's 96, and essentially he looked at Taiwan-China relations he's claiming as a special state-to-state relations. He understands that while he does see it as two different countries, but there's something unique there that has to be dealt with in a very delicate hands. Lee Teng-hui is also 90-something right now, so we'll see how that goes. Then after him, it was the first political party change, significant party change. Originally, the Chinese Nationalist Party was holding position, and then the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP. They were the rising group of the local Taiwanese who was pushing against the Nationalist Party. And Chen Shui-bian, he was a lawyer for a lot of these activists, and eventually became a big figure. He was Taipei mayor, and then he was elected as president. He is, to paraphrase one of the TECO ambassadors, the AIT, head of the AIT. He was telling a story about how the day Chen Shui-bian got elected, he picks up the phone, calls him, and goes like, "Congratulations, please don't fuck things up." Because he knew that Chen Shui-bian had a very, very strong independent, ideology. But essentially, as a U.S. government, they were saying like, "Hey, come on, let's keep it down low. Let's take things slowly. Don't be too gun ho about it." For his first term, his first 4 years, he kept it kind of a little bit more in bay. Then the second term, he was like, "Oh, we're gonna put in a proposal to the United Nations. We're gonna try to be entered as Taiwan," and it became a lot more outspoken about the Taiwanese independence movement. His term didn't end well as corruption charges started coming up, but for the most part, in terms of just their China relations policy, he essentially took it as a very one country, one side. You have yours and I have mine. You're China. He's like, yeah, I agree with one China. Yeah, you're one China and I'm one Taiwan. So that's essentially where he placed it at. Due to Chen Shui-bian's kind of corruption charges and things not going well, the public swung back over again and elected KMT's head, which is Ma Ying-jeou at that time. And Ma Ying-jeou came in, this was in, I think, 2008. He got elected. At this time, Taiwan, financial crisis was happening globally. Taiwan's economy was no longer as good as it used to be in the 90s, and people weren't happy. Their wallets just were thinning out, and things weren't good. So Ma Ying-jeou ran on a platform of economic growth, saying we have to grow our economy, and China's on the rise now. It's the 2000s. China's starting to grow in their wealth-wise. They're opening up now. Says we have to deal with China. And he essentially said, we're in the best position to. We have a shared culture, shared ancestry, we can deal with them. But at the same time, he knew that China, in order to deal with them, he had to kind of finagle some of the words, in some ways that people weren't so happy with. But they were like, economic growth, let's just do it. During his term, opened up a lot of trades. Direct flights started happening. Before him, you had to fly through Hong Kong to get into China, but essentially trade started happening, direct flights started happening, and kind of a level of economic growth started happening as well too. Also during this time, China started talking to the Republic of China, the Taiwanese government, which led up to a historic meeting in Singapore between Ma Ying-jeou and Xi Jinping a couple of years ago. But in the entire time, Ma Ying-jeou has really been pushing as a really special non-state-to-state relations, because he knew that the moment he said state-to-state, there'd be no talking whatsoever. Ma Ying-jeou also went on to doing 2 terms. However, towards the end of his second term, his public approval just tanked. I think at one point the joke is that his approval rating was 9% out of 100. So it wasn't great. I think at certain times people were starting to be worried again about how close Taiwan was to China as well too. So you kind of see this swing back and forth of not just the presidents, but the people themselves going like, yeah, economy, and let's do China whatever it takes, and also wait, don't go too close. So there's this back and forth swing of the people in itself. Then, because of that, led to the current president, President Tsai Ing-wen. Her party is back again, the DPP, which is traditionally more pro-independence, but she knows that as well too, and so she, at any chance possible, she goes like,